For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carol Galante, and I am the founder and the board chair of Terner Labs. I like to say everybody knows it's been 10 years, which means I am 10 years older, which is a little hard to take, but it is pretty amazing all that has happened in this past 10 years for Terner, as well as the rest of the world, I guess. But before I get started, I do want to take a moment and thank U.S. Bank. If there's representatives here from U.S. Bank, please stand to be acknowledged. But we really, really appreciate your support, so thank you very much. I want to start, this is 10 years, I want to start with a little bit of a reflection about why I started the Terner Center, and then we'll go into more detail of where we're going. But I came back from working in the Obama administration in 2015 to go to UC Berkeley and teach and be mentored by Carolina Reed, who's standing in the back. Since I knew a lot about practice, but not a lot about research or teaching, she really has been my guide this past 10 years, or at least the amount of time I worked at Terner. The question comes up frequently, why did you do this? I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it out loud. You were 62 years old. You had a long career already, for God's sake. What made you want to, create the Terner Center for Housing Innovation and later the Terner Labs? And the fact is that I had just spent 6 years in the Obama administration during the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, caused by housing market failures. There's no other way to put that. And so I spent all that time in this deep recovery mode and whatnot. And I get back to California, or even before I got back, but I realized that things, no new supply was being built, lots of things were just stuck for that period of time. And it was really obvious to me that, particularly in California, but also all across the country, we had developed a situation during that period of time where it became clear as it has ever been, and it's always been clear to me that we have, problems with housing affordability in this country. But it became clear two things. One, the federal government is not going to save us, okay? And, I worked for the Obama administration. I thought maybe we could. But the reality is it's going to take local communities, it's going to take states, it's going to take a lot more. And secondly, I really saw that there was just this, all of a sudden, a rapid rise in rental prices. And frankly, to an extent that shocked me, but as we started to do research, it was really clear that some of that was because we hadn't built any supply for a significant period of time. And the other thing was we just had millions of homeowners who were foreclosed on or lost their homes. And guess what? They were renting, because what else were they going to do? All of that meant we need to get our acts together as a country, as cities, as states, and fix the systems that have been in place for a very long time. And so Terner really started with this idea that we need to provide research and backup for those who want to see a different way of doing things to solve the country's problems. And so it was really, formed to provide that backup to the Buffy Wickses of the world, who is here, and also to talk about the stories and the needs from a practitioner's perspective, because that is something that doesn't get dealt with at the national level at making public policy. So here we are, 10 years later, 10 years for Terner Center, 5 years for Terner Labs, and continuing to do what our namesake, Don Terner, would want us to do. And that is to really do whatever it takes, day in and day out, to make this world a better place. And in our idea, that starts with ensuring quality housing for all that's affordable to those who need it. And we continue to do that. And I'm very proud of the work that the team is now doing. And the innovation part of this is also critical. I said the other night at an event, we could have named it the Terner Center for Research. We named it the Terner Center for Innovation for a reason, because it's not just about the research. It is about constantly trying to change to make things better. So that's why I did it, and I'm really glad I did. Having said that, I'm also really glad that I was smart enough to put together a team of really great people and be able to turn the baton over to day-to-day direction of Terner Center and leadership at Terner Center. And I mess around and keep my hand in a little bit. But I think mostly the team is okay with that. So he's our Ben Metcalf, who's about to take over the mic here, is very terrific, experienced guy in both government and housing development, and he is taking us to all kinds of new heights that I, frankly, probably never envisioned. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
It is a treat to get to work for an organization that was founded in honor of Donald Terner, an individual who lived a life that embodied innovation and applied practice and research. It is also an honor and a treat to get to work for an organization founded by Carol Galante, who has helped, I think, push many of us in the audience, and particularly those of us at Terner, to push a little bit harder on our shared work of trying to tackle the affordable housing crisis that we sit in. So thank you to you for kicking us off this evening and for reminding us of the wonderful journey that Terner has been on the last 10 years. I've only been for the back half of those 10, but I was joking last week that every year Terner is like a 7 years, Terner years. Certainly judging by the work we get done, the team gets done. So again, thank you for being here with us tonight. We have a great agenda, and I want to just frame this out with a couple of thoughts. One, obviously, is we're having a conversation really focusing on state and local housing innovation, but obviously we're doing it at a really odd time. The federal government is shut down. Obviously, people are experiencing incredible disruption to their homes and communities all across the country. And yet what we wanted to do tonight was really spotlight some of the ways in which local and state actors are actually rising up in this moment to take advantage of this incredible desire. I mean, a lot of the commentary is still coming out from the election yesterday, but clearly a thread across the country is this sort of felt pain by folks in the electorate who are saying we need solutions to the affordability challenges that we're facing, cost of living changes. And that is driving, I think, another new generation of elected leadership also to try and take some more risks and do some new things. And oddly, even in this moment of sort of turbulence at the federal level, even at the federal level, there are opportunities that are emerging, which smart actors on the ground can figure out how to take advantage of it and work. So our job at Terner is the same as it was a decade ago. And I think we are as well positioned as anybody out there to really nimbly respond to this changing environment and help point a path for all of us as to where to put our energy and effort and lift up as we are, our commitment to like rigorous research and thought, we lift up what's working, lift up the data, lift up the evidence, lift up the promising practices, and help us move forward. And I would say just a couple points. One is, first of all, we are not nonpartisan leaders. So part of our brand has been really trying to be clear that we're coming at it and letting the data and evidence drive us, and that we're trying to figure out how we can help get more housing built, and make sure that it's the right kind of housing, that it fits in the places and the communities where the housing needs to be built, that it's being delivered in ways that are actually benefiting communities broadly and creating opportunities for economic mobility. And I think Carol said this very well, that while we want to fix the system we have, we also know that we need to find new innovative practices that can become scalable. We don't want 1,000 flowers to bloom. We want a handful of new efforts that are really going to scale across the industry and advance systems level change. And then the other wonderful thing about the work we do at Terner is this wonderful intentionality about mentoring the next generation of leaders. I know a few of you stood up in the audience. There's a bunch of students who are here tonight. And for me, that also is part of the energy that I feed off of these younger folks often who are coming up in this field, who are not bruised by all the battles that Carol and I have had beaten into sentences, but still have a fire in the belly to make change. And so our ability to harness that energy and those wonderful students, we've worked with more than 100 students in our 10 years now at Terner, is part of, I think, our secret sauce and part of what's going to really change the world going forward. Today we'll be hearing from a panel of wonderful experts who will share the ways they found to innovate. But first, we get to chat with Assemblymember Wicks. So, Buff, if I could ask you to come right up.
Y'all are having cocktails and I'm sitting here with water.
Working? So I think you all know who she is already, because she is a force out there on housing issues, all the issues that we care about. But just to, for those of you who may have your coming from lands far, far away, she is a member of the California State Assembly and represents the East Bay. She's my assembly person, Terner's assembly person, no less. And has served in a number of leadership roles during her tenure in the Assembly, and currently serves as the chair of the Appropriations Committee after serving as a wonderful stint as the chair of the Assembly Housing Committee. I have witnessed again and again her sort of dogged energy, sort of ruthless desire to get to answers that can actually deliver on the solution. She has taken on some of the hardest political challenges that have ever been tackled in Sacramento on the housing front, and she has wrangled successful bills out there. And I will say, as somebody who did a stint in Sacramento and have seen a lot of housing bills get through, many of them do absolutely nothing. I think what she does is really try and push for really impactful bills that don't just make for a nice, press release, but actually lead to real homes getting built. So true inspiration. And of course, she doesn't just do housing. I mean, she actually has a whole other portfolio of cool stuff on championing the rights of women, working families, protecting kids in the digital world, expanding California's social safety net. So lots of other things that you can pigeonhole her on if you want. So thank you for coming. And I have a few questions for you, but I want to start first with just this crazy year that we're coming out of in Sacramento. A lot of folks did not see 2025 as being one of the biggest years ever in terms of legislative successes. Very few people would have expected a major reform to California's Environmental Quality Act emerging in the midst of the summer. So these things that got done this summer clearly weren't new. I think many of these had been in the air we've been breathing for a while. Jerry Brown famously was talking about secret reform and saying it was the Lord's work a decade ago. But somehow, this was the year it happened. What shifted? Why? What is different this year than in the past? How was it possible? How did you spot the opportunity here to make this be what it is?
Well, thank you. Yeah, we snuck up on you, didn't we, this year on housing? Going to keep you guys on your toes. Well, one, thank you for being here and allowing me to be here. And I also just think of Terner as like my own personal think tank. I just call you guys, text you guys, what are we doing now? Everyone, give me the new ideas. So thank you for that. And obviously, Carol, for your leadership, and Ben for taking the reins here, and for the rest of the staff. So I think a lot culminated this year. That I don't know that any of us really anticipated. A year ago, I wouldn't have said this is where we'd be this year. I think we had, the election results from last November, as horrific as they were, and I won't talk about too much politics, but like personally horrified by what happened nationally. But also we saw a lot of incumbents in California who lost their mayoralships, who lost their seats. And I think it gave a message, at least to me, that like voters are pissed. They want the basic shit done well. They want to be able to afford their rent. They want to be able to maybe one day buy a home. They want their kids to go to decent schools. They want the basic stuff done well. They want their streets safe. So I think for me, that was a wake-up call around where the electorate is at, and also to recognize like they'll walk away from us as Democrats if we don't deliver on those things, and we can't take that for granted. And so I think that helped give more political salience to the idea that we actually have to solve these problems. We cannot be performative about it. Like, I'm done with bill signings. Done. I want ribbon cuttings. I want families moving into housing. And there's a lot of stuff that we do that's performative in politics, and I get it. I'm a politician. Like, I get the job, But I think ultimately voters are going to measure us on like how are we actually solving the problem to make it easier to live in California. And for me, that fundamentally comes down to housing. So I think you had the election results happen. I think you had, for years, people like Scott and I, Scott Wiener, we've been doggedly going at this for quite a long time and figuring out where can we push, where can we pull, how can we build these coalitions to have a moment like this year happen? And I think back to like AB 2011, which I did in 2022, which was a really difficult bill where, I was taking on the building trades. Like, I disagreed with them on policy, on where they were on skilled and trained. That is a very uncomfortable place to be as a Democrat in California politics. These are friends. These are people that I align with on almost everything else. But on this issue, I didn't. And it was very hard to have that kind of political conversation publicly. And what resulted in is we actually had the carpenters come in, and they gave a lot of weight to the conversation and a lot of muscle. And then that built out SEIU, the Service Employees Union, and CSCA, the School Employees Union. And then we also had like the Apartment Association and the Realtors and AARP and United Way, and this whole interesting coalition, and then nonprofit housing affordable developers, like this really interesting coalition that was basically saying we can't do business as usual because our people are suffering. And so that, while that bill has actually only produced, I think, 15 projects have been permitted with it roughly. So it hasn't been the millions of units we want to see, but it changed the politics in Sacramento in a way that we really needed to do. And then we built upon that. Scott has built upon that with his bills. And so we've managed to change the politics in Sacramento starting a couple of years ago. Also combined with the fact that, honestly, the Abundance book came out earlier this year, which was a good intellectual framework conversation for us to have at a grass tops level, sort of this confluence of things. And we have a governor who was really ready to put it all on the line for the CEQA reforms that came out this year. And he basically said, if AB 609, which was my CEQA infill exemption bill, isn't in the budget, I'm not signing the budget, which is a lot for a governor to say. I already started swearing, so maybe I can just keep swearing, I don't know. And then we have a speaker who was all in. I mean, and I'm very close with the speaker. We are very aligned on housing. We are like this. And so I think you had leadership, and also me, like, I don't know, I got elected in 2018, I didn't know where the bathrooms were, no clue about Sacramento, none whatsoever. Honestly, had never done housing work before, but it was just recently a first-time home buyer, so I had experienced the pain of it in the East Bay, and wanted to work on this, but I had to cut my own teeth too, just on the policy. This is a complicated subject matter, but also the politics of it, and how do you bring together the policy and the politics to actually pass reforms. And, I'm now the appropriations chair, right? Which I get that power for like a blink of an eye in my lifetime. And I want to use it really, really well and make sure that I'm really doing stuff that's substantive, that's going to have a positive impact in our communities and really change the issue. So I think it was a confluence of all these things that really enabled us to have just a bang up year on housing.
So that makes sense. I'm curious. She's awesome. I guess the obvious question, sorry, not to just dwell on the victory, but is like, what's next? And I think some folks have said,
we can dwell on the victory a little bit longer, don't you?
Yeah. We've now.
Also, SB 79, so there's a lot that happened.
So particularly on the zoning front, right? Like we can maybe say we've really pushed maybe the zoning thing as far as we can go in California politically. We haven't seen cranes coming up. Is there something else we should be working on? Is there more juice to squeeze on zoning reform next year? I guess really is 2026 going to be another 2025, or is it going to revert back to 2024? How does that?
Well, as long as I'm in the job, I want to do big things.
It is an election year, though, right? Which
Yeah, it's an election year. But the other thing I will say is we had 23 new freshmen this cycle. Yeah. So when I got sworn in last December, 70% of the members were there 2 years or less. Right? Which is crazy. Most of them don't even know what AB 2011 is. So they don't have the scars of that. So they're coming in with a different frame of mind, knowing that what are all these bozos in Sacramento doing? They're not fixing the problem. I want to be part of the change, And I'm like, God bless you. Yes. Let's take that energy and do something with it. And so I've also been trying to bring up the next generation of leaders, because I'll turn into a pumpkin at some point, and I want who are the next Buffy Wickses and Scott Wieners and others who will be at the tip of the spear and say, we need to continue this. So that's what I've been working on. But I also think it was a helpful part of this, because they didn't have the battle scars. So they were just how do we get to actually solving the problem, which has been very nice. I will say, for this next year, though, I'm very excited. I've been leaning on Terner quite a bit, as these guys know. What I think we have to really focus on is the cost of housing. We've done a lot on zoning. I still think we can do more. We still have more permitting reform work to do. So all of that stuff still needs, that's the non-sexy stuff that's actually really, really important. So, and we track our bills. Are they work when they, when we do a bill in Sacramento, we're kind of is this going to work? I don't know. We'll see, But once it goes out into the wild, then we can see, okay, how is it working? Do we need to make some changes here or there? So we'll do a lot of that work, as we should, as good lawmakers should be doing. It's not just about the press release on the bill introduction. It's actually does the thing actually work? So we'll focus on that. But my big focus is going to be cost. I think that's the biggest issue, cost per door. And so how do you affect that? Obviously, you have interest rates. I can't control that. I wish I could. Can't do that. Land costs, always expensive. But then just the cost of construction, right? So I'm chairing a new select committee on housing construction innovation. And we're looking at, and this is why we're leaning on Terner a lot, because you guys have been so at the tip of the spear on this, what are the new models of construction that are going to bring down the cost? So we just went to Sweden. I was blown away. The factories there, you could eat on the floor. It's pretty amazing. Now, California's not Sweden. There's a lot of differences. There's differences the way it's set up. But there are some learnings that we can take from there in terms of how they do it and what they're doing. And I really want to see if there's a way we can create more regulatory streamlining and consistency and guarantees for modular in California, because we have to build. Yes, okay. I didn't finish the sentence, yes. So I'm super interested in modular as a tool. And, I know there's been some disasters of modular. And there's the development community's a little suspect. And I get it. When you read the stories of Katera and other stuff, you're oh, wow, that really failed miserably. But that's going to happen in any industry that's up and coming and growing, right? There's these growing pains. So what can I do as a lawmaker to create a better regulatory environment so that modular succeeds, so that it reaches our goal of bringing down the costs? So those are some of the stuff that I'm looking at. We're going to Idaho. We're on all this like field trips. We're going to go back to Factory OS. We're talking to a lot of different people. While we were in Sweden, we popped over to Copenhagen and met with Cobod. They developed the 3D printers that are doing 3D printed housing. So there's all these different things out there. We should be supporting all this innovation. And I think some of it's going to work and some of it's not going to work. But we should have more innovative models around what we're doing for housing with the goal, again, of bringing down the cost of housing. So that's going to be a big focus of mine, is thinking about what we can do. And I've got a really interesting select committee, Priya, who's chair of local gov. We've got a lot of the folks from the housing committee. We have a lot of leaders who are really interested in thinking through how California can be a leader in modular to bring down the cost. The other thing that I'm going to be focused on is home ownership. We have some of the worst home ownership rates in the country, 49th out of 50th. And this is self-made. This is largely self-made. So how can we tackle that? How can we make, condos, townhomes, all these other things those are good ways for young families to build equity. That's how you build wealth in America, is through home ownership. That is the system that we live in. And for right now, that opportunity is not afforded to many people, specifically our brown and black folks in our communities in particular. So how we do that and create a better environment for condos and townhouses is going to be another big focus of mine.
It's so interesting, like wealth building and home ownership on the one hand, and construction, innovation, and factories. These are not like traditional, like Democrat, progressive items, right? Like these are issues that historically, actually, Republicans often, you're using a lot of language that Republicans historically use to talk about housing. And I guess I'm curious that, we are in this such a ugly partisan world on so many issues. And yet housing somehow has defied that so far. I mean, I think you've been successful in bringing a lot of your Republican colleagues along on bills that are really, so like, how do you think about insulating this as a topic that will continue to reach across party lines?
It's a very good question. And going back to AB 2011, that bill got off the floor because 5 Republicans voted for that bill. It would have not gotten off the floor, even though Democrats have 2/3 of the legislature, right? And so, and this is where I think, I come out of organizing, like I'm a field organizer. That's really what I am. And so I view my job as like, I'm the precinct captain of the floor of the assembly, like on my bill. Like that's the election, that's what I'm doing, and I'm building support. And that really means relationship building with intentionality and connecting with people regardless of what party they are from, because those Republicans have access to a green button. Like I cannot rule with an iron fist. I need 40 people to agree with me. I do not care what party they come from at all, because they are elected by their constituents. And if they agree with me on this issue where we can actually work to bring down the cost of housing, I will work with anyone who's willing to work on that. And so I work very closely with, now we disagree wildly on abortion and guns and all these other things, like these social issues. And like, it is what it is. But on the housing, for me, I've really tried to maintain bipartisan. I always look for Republican co-authors on my bills, especially because, a lot of what we do in California, other parts of the country are looking at it. If it comes out of our House with just Democratic support, immediately half the country's like, whatever, I'm not paying attention to that. It's those crazy progressives, But if I have Republicans with me, they'll pay more attention to it. And I represent one of the most progressive districts in the country, Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond. And my view is that progressive means progress. That is what it means to be a progressive. And for me, I want progress on housing.
It's a powerful message. I know not only have you built this reputation in California, somebody's getting it done, but people know who you are outside of California. And I keep stumbling into other conversations now. And you're right, it's actually not just blue states, it's red states, it's purple states. All across the country, folks are trying to actually do the things that California has done. Whether it's Arizona or Texas or Montana, they're now at this place where they're trying to pass ADU laws, they're trying to do upzoning, they're trying to do permit streamlining. These guys are getting your number, I think. They're calling you up.
I do, yes, I do talk
and so when a legislator from another state calls you up and says, what should we know about California? What are the lessons to be learned from our experience? What are you saying to them?
I mean, it's every state has their own, politics, own issues. In some states, labor has no say, right? Here it's the opposite. Labor has a big say. In some states, you have a real estate industry that's much more powerful or whatever. So it just depends on the state, the politics of the state. But that's where I try really, really hard for folks, other lawmakers, to focus on, one, you have to have good authors of your bills. And any good advocacy organization knows that, you need strong authors who are going to work their bills. I will tell you, there's some of my colleagues who don't even ever ask for my vote on a bill. They just assume. I'm like, oh, that's a terrible idea. You have to have those conversations. So having really strong authors, but really strong partnerships. Again, I'm part of the Progressive Caucus. I'm
progressive, I represent a progressive part of the district, but I work with Republicans because it helps me achieve my agenda, right? Like that's what I was elected to do, is to achieve this agenda. And so I will work with them, and then that makes the moderate Democrats a little uncomfortable, because they're like, oh wait, the Republicans are supporting it, then I should support it, right? So it's like, figuring out the dynamics in your caucus around how do you actually build the power to get to 41 or whatever your number is, and then how do you bring in the outside organizations to complement all of that. In the end of the day, and I didn't appreciate this until I was elected, there's so much that goes into the personal relationships, member-to-member relationships that the public never sees, that a lot of the reason why people vote or don't vote for things is because of those relationships. And so that's where having people in positions, leaders in positions that understand that dynamic in a caucus is really important, and in the legislative body. But I also think it needs to be really centered on what problem are you trying to solve, and lifting up the stories of the people who are experiencing that problem. Because we can talk all day long about policy, we can talk about units of housing and how much we need in 2.5, but we're talking about families and their livelihoods, and single parents who are trying to do the best for their children, and working families, and people that are working 3 jobs and deciding to leave California because they can't afford to live here. We need to center our work on those experiences, which means our politicians need to be talking to people and listening to people that have those experiences, which is really, really important. Because I will tell you, when you go to Sacramento, you can get very disconnected very, very quickly. Very quickly. Your whole schedule is designed to have you not be connecting with real people who are experiencing those problems. So I think that's another piece of advice I always give any politician is listen. You have to go and listen to people that have different experiences than you and understand where they're coming from, so that you can then go to your committee hearing, or you can be in a meeting trying to get a member's vote, and you can speak with conviction and passion about this because you've been listening to your constituents about it.
I know I've heard you say before that, and I know people have pitched you on running for Congress, on running for mayor, and I know what I've heard you say a few times is no, I actually really, this is the place where I can have impact. There's something about working at the state and the assembly where you actually control a lot more levers of power and can really have a lot more influence. And I think that's really inspiring, because I think often people are like, well, I just want to go for the next brass ring in the electoral space. And at some point,
No, I'm good right where I'm at.
Yeah, at some point we'll get you at the governor's office or the White House. But I just want to close, and I know this will sound a little self-serving, I apologize. But you said at the beginning that you referenced Terner Center work, and I guess I would love to hear you talk a little bit about a little bit more. Can you repeat that again? I think it's hard for people often to understand how politics actually happens. And I think what you are saying is that, in fact, even in this age, where a lot seems to hinge on the message and the power dynamics, there is still a space for good arguments and good policy arguments to surface, where you're building the evidence and sort of selling the case on its merits. I mean, that's the vision that we all, I think, heard as a kid when we were growing up about how it happens. So there is still some truth to that, is what I think you're saying. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so we had to tee that up. That was good. I do, by the way, I have the best job in American politics. I mean, the bar's low. So, but I get to live in my home state. I get to work on the issue I care about. I have all of these wonderful, smart people. I'm the idiot politician with the smart people around me trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And then I get to go to Sacramento, work with a great team, Steve Wertheim and others in my office, and work really closely with the speaker and the governor and our leadership in the Senate and Scott Wiener to actually solve problems. Where is that happening in politics? It's not happening in the federal government. And we're on our own, team. It's us. So the cavalry's not arriving. It's we got to fix the situation. But we're smart, we're creative, it's California, we're innovative, and we have the Terner Center to help us figure it out. And I will say, to add to that, there's so much that happens in this job where there's all this politics and there's personalities and there's, and we've debated in our caucus with Trump, how do you handle that? We could spend all day yelling at Donald Trump, literally all day, because he does crazy shit 25 times a day. But then if we're spending all day doing that, we're not actually spending time fixing the things that we have the authority and ability to fix. Now, we have to respond to some of it, because when he's sending the National Guard to our communities and arresting brown people simply for being brown, we have to speak up and push back and do all that, and we have to fight him. And also we have to focus on the things where we actually have control and ability to fix the problem. But what we need in order to do that is the smart policy ideas. because we're making shit up in Sacramento. Like, we need the smart people who are spending time researching, understanding, kicking the tires, stress testing this stuff, understanding the market conditions, the dynamics, the industry, how people think about this stuff. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this work. And I'll tell you, I have this job, I love this job, but I go back and forth to my babies every single night, and I'm making a sacrifice to do that. So if I'm gonna do that, I wanna do the big things and solve the problem, and that starts with good policy. You have to have good policy, otherwise none of it's worth it.
On that note, thank you. And thank you for your leadership. We are so grateful for all you're doing. We're going to move to our panel presentation now. I want to introduce our panelists, moderator for our panel coming up, and so if our wonderful group can come up to the front. Priya is going to be hosting this session. For those of you who haven't met Priya, she is my old friend and former colleague at HUD, and she now leads the National Housing Trust, where she's been since 2018. The National Housing Trust, for those of you who haven't worked with them, is a player and a major influence in DC and across the country. They have led the way on issues around affordable housing preservation, sustainability, and energy efficiency. And I'm very proud to count her as one of our board members at Terner Labs. Thank you for hosting the conversation here. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben, and wonderful to see so many people here. As Ben mentioned, I lead National Housing Trust, but tonight I feel like my most honored role is a proud board member of Terner Labs, and just so in awe of what Ben and Carol and the entire Terner team have built over the last 10/5 years for the center and the labs. And it was wonderful to hear from Carol the origin story, and I think I'm really inspired about that change and innovation. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and while I love it, I think that as a field, we have not embraced change and innovation as much as we could, and I think that what the Terner Center and Terner Labs have catalyzed over this decade really is remarkable when you see the progress we've made. If you haven't been paying attention, it's a weird time in our country. It's a weird time for a lot of things, but also for housing. On the one hand, we've had the largest expansion of the low-income housing tax credit since its inception in 1986. The Road to Housing Act, which has real momentum in moving to the House, does some pretty remarkable things. It eliminates the RAD cap. It tackles and streamlines NEPA. It gets rid of chassis requirements for manufactured housing, expands CDBG, zoning reform, and encouraging more housing and opportunity zones. These are things that we've aspired to for a long time. On the other hand, last week, devastating and cruel cuts to Medicaid went into effect. Implementation and regulation around affirmatively furthering fair housing is being rolled back. There are threats to the voucher program and the mixed income rule. And there's interest in freeing up public land for development, but not necessarily in a thoughtful or equitable way. So it's hard to reconcile what all this means. And I think, as Buffy so inspiringly talked about, a lot of the balance of power and innovation has moved to the state and local level. So I'd love to hear from all of you. How has the changing federal role in housing impacting your work? What are you doing differently today? What programs and policies are you shoring up in this new environment? We'll start with you, Tamika.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. How y'all doing? It feels so good to be home. Hey. Before I answer your question, Priya, I would be remiss not to just acknowledge my deep gratitude to the Terner Center. And I'm not going to get emotional because we got so much to talk about. But when I think about the last 10 years of work that Terner has done in community with all of us, frankly, it's extraordinary to be able to have the integrated research and policy come together and be able to drive systems change. We have actually witnessed it. And I wouldn't be able to sit in this chair without acknowledging Carolina Reed, who, when I was first, sorry ladies, just indulge me for a second. When I was first starting to talk about regionalism around how do we deal with our affordability crisis and how do we make sure that there is housing for extremely low income households, that language was not in the ethos. We did not have case making for how to make sure that we were responding to the housing needs of everyone on our housing continuum. And it was really Carolina who believed in us and began to partner with my organization to develop the case making for helping our policymakers and community members understand that those workers, those essential community members needed housing too. So thank you to Terner for cementing your presence, frankly, in the paradigm because it's vitally important. So I feel like I don't have a lot to say since Buffy basically said everything I would say. But, you know, I think it is really amazing to be sitting in the seat as secretary of our housing and business consumer services work because California actually does have a lot of work that we've been doing for decades to make sure that Californian civil rights are protected, that we are protecting people from fraud, that we are thinking about housing and housing reform to make sure that we can house every Californian. Medi-Cal, we have Medi-Cal in California, right? And so in a time when we are under attack in many ways, to have the grounding of California's commitment to make sure that our values and our people are taken care of is kind of a proud moment to sit in this seat. And I haven't felt a lot of pride in being in the United States lately. So I will say first that we are not starting from scratch. We have a lot of policy and infrastructure that we get to build on in order to respond to threats like this. I think just some specific examples of what I'm most excited about. You talked about the 50% test. We've been advocating for that at the federal level for a really long time, to be able to then figure out how we translate that at the state level to double our housing production. Those are opportunities that we are talking about right now. We've been asking for it, and now is the time to figure out how do we help our entire ecosystem deliver on building more housing faster and cheaper. I think that there are some other examples of the California Financial Protections Bureau, which has been decimated at the federal level, to be able to have a Department of Financial Protection and Innovation who's taken up that torch at the state level to make sure that our citizens and residents are protected against fraud and protecting our banks and credit unions. So it does feel like the governor especially is clear about where we can lean in and make sure that we are holding the federal government accountable. We were one of 20 states that sued the federal government around the SNAP benefits. So using our tools and resources to make sure that we are backstopping the aggression and pain that's being inflicted on this entire country, it feels like a really proud moment for California.
Thank you.
Nithya?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Nithya. I'm a council member from the city of Los Angeles. I'm representing District 4 and the chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee on the LA City Council, and I'm really happy to be here. Definitely does not feel like home, because it's not. But I have read Terner Center reports in the past and learned from them a lot. And I think one of the things that's, I just wanted to thank you for having me today in this space. And to say that as an elected official in Los Angeles, where we have an incredible challenge around housing and homelessness, just an enormous challenge that we're grappling with day to day. I am an urban planner by training. I have some of my urban planning classmates here. Let's go MIT. But I still feel so overwhelmed by the scale and the enormity of the issues that we're facing, and about the various programs and processes that we've put in place in this state to address those issues. They're really complicated. And so to be able to understand them and to learn from them and to have a resource to lean on, I think for me has been really good, and just I'm very grateful to be here learning, actually, even in this conversation. So thank you very much. The last few months have been really hard for us in LA, and we're facing some very dire situations that I think are spread out across the state, but are particularly dire for LA because of the enormity of our crisis. So we had, when I first started in office in January of 2021, I didn't know this because that was my first time in office, but we were flush with cash from COVID relief funds. And we were able to do so much for people who were experiencing homelessness that we couldn't do before. We had thousands of vouchers in the city of Los Angeles, these emergency housing vouchers that we were able to use. And actually in my committee, we made HACLA match every single voucher. We were like, we are not sending a single voucher back to the feds. And we didn't. We matched every single person. But now the ongoing funding for those vouchers has been cut off by the federal administration. So now we have 7,000 people in the county, about 3,500 people in the city, who will no longer have that, what was supposed to be a decade-long voucher, that will be cut off at the end of next year. And we have to find a way to keep them in housing. We have potentially the loss of Section 8 vouchers or the use of certain kinds of vouchers in the way that we have been using them. And so we're thinking that maybe about 8,000 people who are housed in our supportive housing voucher program may also be at risk of losing their home. So we're looking at some very scary possibilities ahead in Los Angeles. And we've actually made progress on homelessness for the very first time. And now it feels like it's a potential to reverse that progress and get much worse, which is really scary. But the thing that's also really exciting is that I represent a city which has voted over and over again to respond to our housing and homelessness crisis with increased investments from Angelenos. And I'm so proud of that. That's the message I ran on. I said, we can do more on homelessness and we can address this issue. We can get people off the streets. And I've done that in my district over and over again. And the city and the county have voted in new measures that have actually created local pots of funding. Measure ULA, which I know for the housing community has some challenges, but it has created a source of revenue locally that we didn't have before, that we can put towards things like short-term vouchers that can replace some of the federal funding that we have. Similarly, with Measure A, we have a pot of funding that is just for housing that we can use to potentially backfill these sources that are being taken away from us from a very cruel federal administration. And I will say, just as you said, Tamika, that I feel proud to be a Californian. I feel proud to be an Angeleno that wants to address this crisis, not with incarceration, not with forced mental institutions, which is what the Trump administration has been talking about, but really through compassion and care, and that we're willing to fund those efforts. And it's been both a scary time, but also an inspiring time to be a local politician.
Hi, I'm Pam Wisniewski. I'm also far from home. I am the Housing Commissioner for the state of New York. Certainly would underscore both everything that both of you have said, and just sort of add, in addition to the sort of the chaos that we have all sort of been living at the federal level, there's been a little bit of chaos in the city of New York, as people may have read about. So it's been an interesting time to be in state government, kind of sandwiched in between those two layers. In some ways, it has emboldened us and made us feel very steady and very much a guiding hand in trying to create predictability and reliability in government in the state. Certainly, as sort of Priya laid out, it's been a little, I don't know what the word is, but to go from sort of like they're going to cut CDBG and home and block grant Section 8 to, and we're going to drop the 50% test to 25, it was sort of like, I don't know what we're doing here. It makes us realize in terms of sort of doing our business differently, like other than Section 8, which, I think we all very much feel differently about. CDBG and home have been around so long, are incredible. We have learned and we sort of know we can sort of operate in a world where those may, to the extent that those are changed, hopefully for the better, but in cases for the worse, we've tried to figure out how we can adapt at the state level without resources from the feds. I don't think any of us think that Section 8, a world without Section 8 is one that is going to provide any stability for locals, city, state governments across the country. But I think the other thing that we've done, and this sort of predates the chaos of the last year, at the state level is, we were for a very long time very kind of myopically focused on affordable housing. It's our mission, what we do. And people really thought of us as sort of like a tax credit agency, but we realized 4 or 5 years ago that just building affordable housing in some ways is limiting for us, and that we need to think more expansively about all housing that's getting built and where it's getting built and what is it, and we have to sort of contextualize the affordability needs in the overall housing landscape. I would also shout out to Terner, and we have sort of a Terner cousin in New York City called the Furman Center. We as housing agencies and government can't always do all that ourselves, and so we rely very much on sort of data-driven conversations, convenings, white papers, and all the analysis that goes into that. But I think that for us has helped us in this time where we are, very thankful for changes in the tax credit program, but also very nervous about what could come down from the feds. Very thankful that we have broadened our view to be able to look at what else is there besides just the tax credit program that we can do to address homelessness, folks with mental illness, families struggling to get by, access to homeownership, all the issues that we all work on all the time.
Buffy mentioned abundance. Part of the policy conversation around abundance is focused on the need for blue states to demonstrate that can get things done. Great on enacting the policies, need to implement them. How, Tamika and Ruth Ann, is that filtering down into your work, and what are you doing differently, or how is that showing up?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with every part of our system doing its best to produce and preserve housing. And in California, I feel like we've been talking a lot in this administration about accountability. How do we know that the resources and the programs and policies are actually working? When you step out your door and you are experiencing your neighbor who is destitute on the street, are you doing enough to address homelessness? So I think the first thing is to recognize that there has been tremendous progress in our efforts to address our twin crises of homelessness and housing affordability. And yet, because this is decades in the making, it takes a really long time to figure out how to scale solutions that we know are working, but to scale them at the pace of the need, as well as to help our electorate and the public understand that we know what we're doing. So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is how do we both hold ourselves accountable for the outcomes and stewardship of the resources that people expect by putting performance metrics in our housing and homelessness funding, where our local partners understand what is expected to utilize those resources. How do we provide technical assistance for our local governments and stakeholders to actually figure out how to braid local funding and state funding together so that the impact can be multiplied. And so accountability to me is not a buzzword. It's about how are we collectively doing the best we can to hold ourselves accountable for the outcomes that communities expect. We have started the Housing Accountability Unit during this administration, which really for the first time are holding local jurisdictions accountable for following state law around housing. We still have a real challenge with local jurisdictions wanting to say yes to housing. And when we see those things come up, we are able to intervene. We don't want to take folks to court, but we will if people are not saying yes to housing. And that work in and of itself has unlocked more than 30,000 units of housing in California that otherwise would not have been available to Californians that need it. The governor also worked on our Surplus Lands Act and our excess sites, which made state lands available, prioritized state lands, in fact, for affordable housing. And so we want to make sure that we're removing as many of those barriers to incentivize our developer partners to say yes to those sites. Land cost is one of the most significant impediments to housing affordability. We want to make that land free, cheap, accessible, so that more of those projects can be built. And we've had 32 projects across the state of California built on excess sites. And so I think some of it is making sure that we are seeing if the solutions that we are investing in work, but also having some discipline, political, and social will to stick to the solutions that work. And I just want to give Councilmember Rahman a shout out for a second, because we often hear about Los Angeles because there are so many of our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness in LA. But in Los Angeles, they house 207 people a day. And during that same period of time, 227 become unhoused, right? So that tells me two things. One, folks know how to end homelessness for people. We know what we're doing. But unless we address the systemic failures that are propelling more and more of our neighbors into housing precarity, we will not win. And so I think it's really important to recognize that part of it.
Sam?
So Governor Kathy Hochul is extremely housing supply focused. She talks about it all the time. She is very genuine in sort of telling her own personal narrative about how her parents had opportunity along the way as they were, had one child and then two and then three and then four. They lived in a mobile home park, and then they had an apartment, and then they had a small cape, and that doesn't exist anymore in the state of New York. And she's fiercely advocating for us to really get focused on supply, which has been great. We went out a couple of years ago with a sort of stick and carrot approach around zoning and a sort of series of policies that did not go well. And all the localities were like, "Thank you for telling us what you think we should do, but no, thank you." And we don't want to rezone, and we may or may not want to grow our housing stock. We may not want other people to live here. All the things you would normally hear. But what it did for us in New York was it sort of changed the conversation, because we sort of started the conversation and said, we know that we need to drastically change what we're doing because we're not doing so great. So we're gonna set a target that we need to double our housing production if we really want to meet where we are on job growth. And so that sort of helped us sort of set a framework, and then within that, a series of policies that she drives us to say, how are you going to go from 400,000 over the next 10 years to 800,000? I want to see the stack, and then I'm going to ask you, every 90 minutes how we doing so far. And for anyone who knows, it takes a minute to build a housing unit, so it's it's very, very tightly wound. But we, since that time of not getting through sort of our big idea, we have gotten through tax incentives for commercial conversions. We have changed sort of big changes in zoning in New York City, prompted by a lot of the work at the state. Other funding that goes out to localities for them to be able to also rezone at the local level. We started this thing called the Pro Housing Communities Program. So we took a big chunk of money. We had almost $1 billion at the state that goes to localities. And we said, you can only get this money if you're going to certify that you are a pro-housing community. And that was a big deal for people. Now, we told people you have to grow your housing stock, or you have to pass this sort of local resolution saying you're going to grow your housing stock. Lots of communities that were very NIMBY were like, well, we cannot pass that locally because we will all be out of office. So then I guess we have to grow. And we're only about 2.5 years in, but we have a lot of communities certified. They are also submitting us all their data. So we're creating kind of a transparent database. People can see where housing is being built and where it's not. And localities want the money because, from a state and local function, it's a real great carrot. And so it is making them go to their local communities and say, in order for us to get access to these funds, we really have to be thinking about our housing stock. And that has been a big game changer for us just in terms of changing the conversation in the state. It's not just about zoning, because there's a lot of other sort of pieces of this beside it, but certainly starting that conversation and having people being really focused on, we're not going to tell you what kind of housing you have to build, but you have to be building housing.
I know you didn't ask me this question, but I wondered if I could step in here, because I think that as policymakers, we can do certain kinds of things. Like we can do permitting reform or process reform within the city of Los Angeles, which my office has been trying to lead on and trying to push very archaic city processes and departments to think about housing not as an additional thing to providing water and power, but as part of their core function. It's like, we have to build more and you have to provide water and power to new construction, right? So that's, part of the work that we're doing, trying to get the Department of Building and Safety and the Department of City Planning to talk to each other and to actually create a true sense of what development services is in the city of Los Angeles. And all of this is work that we're kind of pushing on. We can do zoning reform, and we've done it often because we're pushed to by the state, because not a lot of my colleagues want more density, but they're forced to absorb more density, and they have to talk about where they want it. And so we've been doing that, right? But I think the biggest thing for me, which has been really exciting, when I ran first in 2020, the concept of abundance was not really in the ether. And so I talked about building more housing. I talked about wanting to have more density. I talked about the need for more housing as one of the drivers of the lack of affordability in LA. But what people really what resonated with people was the work I did on homelessness and talking about homelessness. In my most recent election, I got reelected last year. My district was redrawn to make it as hard for me as possible to get reelected. That was I don't know if you guys remember the tapes leaked in LA. What they were discussing on those tapes was redistricting and redrawing the lines to save their own seats and to draw their perceived political enemies out of office, and I was one of them. But I showed them, here I am. And they redrew my lines to have it be one of the most anti-housing districts in Los Angeles. And I represent Sherman Oaks, and I represent Encino, and I represent the southern San Fernando Valley, which is the birthplace of the anti-growth movement in Los Angeles, which transformed the city in the 80s. I mean, they downzoned every major corridor. Like, why is LA full of strip malls, one-story strip malls on Wilshire and Ventura, like these major streets? It's because we built it that way. We planned it that way through these propositions and through changing our zoning code. And it was an incredibly successful political movement that reshaped our city and that created our current housing crisis. And now it feels like a moment where saying no to housing finally has a political cost. Finally. And, and that is so exciting for me as someone who has been thinking about this issue for a long time, who has been talking about it. The idea that the culture of Los Angeles, which has rewarded politicians for saying no for so long, that we're finally chipping away at that. That is the work of your department and the work that you're doing with accountability, but also the work of changing culture across America, and I'm here for it.
I think that's right, and I think that upzoning is kind of having a moment across the country. And I think Minneapolis, 8 or so years ago, was one of the first to usher in upzoning, and I think recent research has shown that the rate of acceleration of home prices in Minneapolis is significantly below other places, so it seems to be working, which is great. On the other hand, I think Ben or Buffy mentioned that we're still not seeing cranes everywhere. What's it going to take? What more is needed? Any notes of what works and what more is needed to maybe unlock that potential of upzoning that we all think is there, but has been slower to materialize. I'm going to start with Ruth Ann this time.
I mean, I would say, sort of to echo where you started, it took us a long time to get into this problem, so it's going to take us a while to get out. So I do think it's hard to, we all operate with a sense of urgency that just can't be satiated in like a 12 or 24 or 36 month window, but I do think we'll get there. I think we have sort of, whether it's state capital, which we're very fortunate in the state of New York that there is a lot of capital that goes into affordable housing, whether it's tax incentives to spur mixed income rental housing. I think we are, thank you, California, I think we are on the verge of looking at if you guys can do it, we can too, on environmental review. So I think that as we all sort of mimic each other and sort of start to peel away, certainly streamlining and permitting and those types of issues, I think it's, there is no one thing that solves this. It is sort of sustained year over year, sort of scraping away at the things that make housing production modular, as the Assembly woman said. I think it's scraping away at the cost and the time. I think it takes an enormous amount of time. I don't know how many ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings I go to where the organizations talk about, 8 years ago we bought this. So if you need to get out of the like nostalgic, 10-year battle to get to the groundbreaking story and into the we just recently launched this manufactured housing pilot in the city of New York, and we got a 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, 6 months from like conception to homeowner buying the house. We need to be finding more ways, or we are cutting the amount of time and the amount of cost, the amount of regulatory barriers that prevent us from getting housing quicker.
I have one better for you, Ruth Ann. I attended a groundbreaking of farm worker housing in Monterey County. This group of tenacious leaders, it took them 20 years to get 84 units built. That's exactly the reaction we should be having. So what are we doing? I think that there are really important footholds that have been scaffolding this moment of where we are in terms of our housing and homelessness policies. And what is exciting to me is one of the reasons that I came into state service and served with the governor was to stand up a standalone housing and homelessness agency for the state of California. And I think for a lot of people who have worked in government, you can be like, you mean the reform is you creating a new agency? It doesn't sound very exciting. But what is exciting about it is that for the first time, I have been at this work, y'all, for 22 years in California, many years before I came to California. And when I first arrived, housing and homelessness was not the central topics for the voters and people of California. We were still begging people to pay attention to putting resources into housing. And in California, the majority of resources that have funded our housing growth has come from our legislature and our governor. Not the feds. Our local communities are doing what they can when they pass local measures. But this administration has put more into housing than any other administration in California. And it's not enough. We need an ongoing commitment, no matter what governor or administration sits in the seat. We need to be having state infrastructure that forces us to aggregate our programs. Right now, there are more than 16 departments and agencies that touch housing and homelessness policy and funding. You wonder why it takes 12 years and $1 gajillion to fund housing? It's because we have such a fractured housing finance system in California. One of the most complex. Roxanne, I appreciate New York has done tremendous work in streamlining and taking a pragmatic approach to housing finance, and BAFA is actually inspired by your work in New York. But at the state level, we need to do the same thing. So one of the innovations of standing up this new agency is creating a housing development finance committee, which will be able to harmonize all of our housing programs across state government into one place. where we can have a singular application, where you don't have to stack up 18 stacks of capital. Well, you might still have to stack up a lot. I can't guarantee we're gonna get rid of it all, but it can't be 18, it can't be 12. I mean, 6, I don't know. Anyway, the point is, it's gonna be less, and it's going to allow us to shift. I think one of my colleagues here talked about culture and behavioral change. We need to all show up differently around this crisis that we are collectively trying to solve. And that starts at the person who is processing your loan documents to the governor of the state of California. Everyone in between needs to be able to say, what is my contribution to addressing our housing and homelessness crisis? I have a role to play. I may not be proximate to the neighbor across the street who is unhoused when I sit in my office in Sacramento, but that's who I come to work for. And if we can figure out how to create a culture where it's a yes and we are all in it together, I think we can start to see some real movement based on all of the reforms that have been made over the last decade.
Out by coming back to where Carol started the conversation tonight. Terner was really founded to think about forward. How do we innovate? How do we constantly change? Nithya, let's start with you. What's next? We've talked about the existing panoply of programs and successes. We need more. What's the future? What's your vision?
So, I feel like I'm grappling now with this moment of incredible uncertainty in LA because of federal changes and how it's going to be impacting how we provide support for people who are lower income or who are experiencing homelessness. And the thing that I've been the most excited about is actually being forced to look at what works, because we just don't have the funding to be able to do it all anymore. So we are going to have tough political conversations about cutting programs that are too expensive or not effective enough. And in some ways, while I think it's going to be very, very hard for us as an ecosystem to do that, the fact that we are looking at hundreds of millions of dollars less in LA to address the issues that we're grappling with is forcing us to do that. And in LA, I worked with our Homeless Services Authority, which is a joint powers entity between LA City and LA County. And everyone's always complained, like, oh, we don't have data, or the data's not good enough. And I got a grant, and we worked with the entity, we worked with the service providers, and now we're looking across every single program that we're investing in and looking at how long are people staying in shelter? How long are people staying before they're exiting into permanent housing? How many people are actually moving into permanent housing? And what we're finding is that some of the most effective programs actually are our most cost-effective programs as well, like our short-term rental subsidy programs. We have this program called a time-limited subsidy, which is a 2-year rental voucher, which has some of the best outcomes for people in terms of retaining housing and moving into better housing outcomes at the end of it, right? And so if we can just look at that program, if we can make sure that people are getting the case management they need, if we can make sure that we're improving those outcomes, we can actually take our existing pool of money that Angelenos have voted to fund and give us. We can make sure that every dollar that taxpayers are giving us is going towards housing the largest number of people possible. And because we are in such dire straits, the fact that I want to have that conversation is not as politically toxic as it would have been had I tried to cut programs in a different environment. And I think it's hard, but it is also something that I think has opened up a space that didn't exist before.
I would say there's so much to be depressed about with what's going on in the world, but there's also it also feels like an incredibly sort of optimistic time on the housing front because there is so much acknowledgement of the problem. It is so much in the national conversation. There's a lot of resources to it, and there's a lot of innovation around it. In all sort of fronts. So I think we, to your how do we get sort of cranes faster and how do we, we will get there. And I think that there also, homelessness is very much front and center, I think, for most cities in this country in a way that where I think it had been, well, I'm not saying people are trying to hide it in the shadows, but I think there is no ability really to do that for not just sort of New York and California, but everywhere in between too. And so I think that we are fortunate in the affordable housing industry, that it is such an incredible sort of industry and sort of ecosystem, and people are creative. There's incredible data. People that have been doing it for a very long time, and people who just started who are sort of equally contributing to really sort of amazing stuff going on. So it does feel a little bit like I feel a bit of hope as I think about that.
I feel like what's next is we have to change the conversation about housing. I think understanding that housing is foundational to a person's ability to thrive in their communities should be the baseline of how we talk about it. It should not be about the units. It should not be about unhoused people versus homeowners. I think we need to see housing as foundational. And when we can see that, then there's an intersectional way to look at housing policy. I tell all of my colleagues, the Secretary of Human Services, I'm like, housing is health. Secretary of Transportation, I'm like, housing is also transportation. Housing is also energy and climate goals, right? There is such a foundational connection to having housing that you can afford, whatever your income is, whatever your circumstance is, it is made better when you have stable housing. So it's not just housing advocates or political leaders or government officials' job to advocate for housing. It really should be the responsibility of every Californian to demand that we make sure that there is housing in our communities for everybody that needs it.
Now we have a few minutes for audience questions. Great.
Hi. First of all, I hope you all hang out or get a drink or something after. You're really cool. So at different points in time, it was brought up a little bit, and my question is specifically around capital. I've heard a rumor that there's a handful of pretty big financial institutions buying a lot of our houses. One of the things I'm interested in, and Ms. Moss, my question is for you, looking beyond the current financial levers the state has, we have rent control, we have grants, we have all these things. Is there anything around the sphere of controlled capital or limited profits, anything beyond the current financial incentives that you are looking at and saying, that could be pretty cool? Yes, that's my question.
I mean, it's a great question. I had a chance to go to Vienna last summer. I don't know many of you may have gone to look at their model around social housing. And, there are many similarities and differences, but what was so profound to me was this sort of 100-year commitment that it was the community's responsibility to make sure that housing was accessible to all. And it transcended partisanship. It was really sort of ingrained in the culture of that community. So that was the first thing. I was like, wow. Imagine if we had a California that held that value for decades, right? That housing was not a commodity, that this country was not built on ensuring that certain people didn't get access to housing, but that it was a public good, right? So I think that there are some conversations around both how do we shift our sort of cultural association with housing, but also are there financial models that can allow us to not have to deeply subsidize everybody? If we have to subsidize people who have zero incomes and people who are earning 150% of AMI, there is not enough money to go around. And so how do we work with private capital? How do we work with the banks? What are our underwriting policies? Like, what allows us to have the market be able to take care of some of the higher income housing? And this is where I'm looking at Terner, because I'm like, this is a very important question. I don't know the answer to, but I would love it. And I want to put it, because at the state level, we are designing our agency around meeting the full continuum of housing needs. And that's not just a platitude. That is, we need income, housing at all income levels, and I need programs and resources in each of those buckets to be able to allow us to exponentially expand our toolkit as state government, because I'm willing to do it all. Cal HFA, what you got? What can we do? HCD, so I'm willing to have the conversation, but I need some tools and models that give us a little bit more flexibility.
Hi, I just came from the ULI housing conference. It was a great conference, a lot of really good ideas. So one of the ideas I heard, and I'm the housing manager for the city of Los Altos, so it's a very affluent community. And they talked a lot about regionalism, right? So we're all, yes, our own local individual jurisdictions, but we also influence each other within our counties and regions. And so one thought that these more affluent communities that are NIMBYism, right? They don't want in Atherton or Portola Valley or maybe Beverly Hills or, very affluent communities that maybe aren't meeting their RENA, lower, very low, extremely, any of that, right? And so the idea was maybe these communities could then help fund the housing where other communities would want. So regionalism, like how do we work within communities that, if you don't want it there, but you have the resources, why wouldn't you then contribute to the other cities that are willing to take that on, right? So I thought that was a great idea. And then the accountability, right? Cities should be held to do their part. And I'm the housing manager for a city, right? I'm sitting next to EAH. We're building our first 100% affordable project in Los Altos. Thank you, EAH. Welcome, So, yeah, I thought that was a great idea. So, I don't know. So just throwing that out there and thinking we should be thinking not only just individual cities, but regionally wide.
Amen.
We have a regional entity now in Los Angeles called La Casa, which is funded through Measure A, which is a county-wide sales tax. And a percentage of that sales tax goes to this Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, that's the Los Angeles Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. And it is actually designed to do exactly that, to be a regional source of funds for affordable housing. And I don't know the answer to that exact question, which is how do you balance kind of communities that haven't built what they're supposed to, right? And may not ever want to do that, and communities that are building a lot. I think maybe it's through mandates that the state puts in, but these regional bodies, what I think they should be doing is also creating a lot of incentives. Really making it attractive for communities to be able to build these projects and giving them the opportunity to achieve their goals through projects that make the cities proud. And I do believe that that's an opportunity. I will also say there's incredible disparity in LA County. So a lot of people complain about Los Angeles and how little we build, and oh my God, everyone complains about LA. LA is amazing. It is amazing. It is the best city, sorry. And I know there's a lot of problems, but we are fighting to make those problems better every day. Like, we are so in it. And you compare it to other cities in LA County, and LA City is building more per capita than almost every other jurisdiction within LA County, right? Like, over a 5-year, I was just looking at some data, over a 5-year period, LA built like 86,000 units, right? City of Beverly, rental units during that period. City of Beverly Hills built 3. And even compared to cities like Long Beach and others that have developed a reputation for being easier to work with for developers, whether affordable housing or for-profit, we're building more per capita than Long Beach. I just wanted everyone here to know that.
I think with that, we are going to wrap it up. I'm going to pass it back to Ben Metcalf.
Let's give a very warm round of applause to our amazing panel this evening. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership. That concludes our programming this evening. I do want to acknowledge the amazing Jesse Maudlin, who has anchored our logistics this evening. Thank you. If you're not receiving the Terner newsletter, if you're not on our social media, please do make sure you're signed up so you're getting the benefit of our work. We are going to continue our 10-year spirit with an event on March 12th over the UC Berkeley campus, so we'll hope to see many of you back again for that evening. Feel free to linger for a few minutes. We may have a few snacks in the back still for those of you who want a bite to eat before you leave. We appreciate you and all you do. Please, thank you for being a part of this community. Have a good night.